Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us today.
Really glad.
Yeah. I want you to picture a scenario. It's well, a universally relatable scenario that I think we have all lived through more times than we would probably like to admit.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So everything is going great. You are having one of those weeks where you are just riding high. You're hitting all your goals. Your inbox is actually miraculously at zero.
A rare feeling.
A very rare feeling. Your morning coffee order was absolutely perfect, and you just feel entirely unstoppable. You are competent, you are professional, and then bam,
Yeah.
it happens. One single setback. And it could be a missed deadline. It could be an awkward presentation where you just stumbled over a slide and completely lost your train of thought.
Or even something smaller.
Exactly. Like maybe it's just one mildly critical email from your boss that says something horribly vague like, let's discuss your approach here.
The worst email to get.
The absolute worst. And suddenly your confidence just completely evaporates. It vanishes into thin air. Your entire week is ruined.
It's gone.
Right. You go from feeling like an absolute genius who has their entire life together to feeling like a complete fraud who is moments away from being found out. And the craziest part to me is how quickly it happens. In a matter of seconds, your entire self-perception just flips upside down. Why does that happen to us? Like, why do we give that one tiny negative thing so much power over our entire reality?
Well, it is a profound psychological and, frankly, physical shift. And it happens so incredibly fast that it feels completely out of our control. We essentially become passengers in our own bodies when that single drop of negative feedback hits our system.
Passengers in our own bodies. I love that phrasing. And that is the exact mission of today's deep dive.
Right.
We are going to uncover exactly why the human brain is hardwired to give negative experiences so much immense psychological weight.
That's biological imperative.
It really is. We're going to figure out why your brain actively ignores the 10 things you did perfectly and fixates on the one thing you messed up. But more importantly, we're going to look at how you can actually hijack that biological response to build unshakable long-term confidence.
Because you can hijack it.
Yes, and we have a truly fascinating stack of sources to go through for you today. We are pulling from neuro protocols for failure recovery, deep research on the differences between fragile and secure self-esteem, insights from cognitive behavioral therapy, a classic paper on self-efficacy by Albert Bandura.
A brilliant paper.
So good. Plus neural evidence of how the brain reacts to mistakes in mere milliseconds, and even the lived experiences of elite, world-class women athletes who deal with failure on a massive global stage.
And if we connect all of these seemingly disparate sources to the bigger picture, a very clear narrative emerges for you today. Failure isn't just a psychological hurdle or a bad mood. It is a profound biological event.
A biological event.
Yes. By understanding the actual hardware of the brain, what is physically happening inside your skull when you make a mistake, you can decouple your emotional response from your actual performance. You can move from being a victim of your biology to an active operator of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the actual biological reality of a setback, because I think a lot of us view our reaction to failure as a character flaw.
Right, we blame ourselves.
We do. We think, oh, I'm just too sensitive, or I'm weak for letting this get to me. But the research completely shatters that idea. There is a concept from the neuroprotocols we reviewed that makes a really bold statement right out of the gate.
And is a necessary statement.
It argues that the conventional, everyday advice to just stay positive or look on the bright side after a failure is dangerously inadequate. It's basically like trying to casually edit a spreadsheet while your computer is literally engulfed in flames.
That analogy of the computer on fire is perfect because it highlights that this is a hardware problem, not a software problem. You can't just run a positive thinking program when the motherboard is melting. When you experience a setback, your brain doesn't care that you're just sitting in a climate-controlled office looking at a laptop screen. The error detection circuits in your brain fire within 100 milliseconds.
Hold on, 100 milliseconds? That's, what, a tenth of a second?
Exactly.
That is literally faster than the blink of an eye.
It's roughly a tenth of a second, yes. Before you even have the conscious thought, oh no, I messed up, or before you can even articulate what went wrong, your brain has already registered the error and categorized it as a life or death threat to your survival.
So before I even have the time to consciously feel embarrassed about a typo, my brain has already pulled the ultimate biological fire alarm.
Precisely. And pulling that fire alarm triggers something called an amygdala hijack.
An amygdala hijack?
Yes. The amygdala is the brain's ancient alarm system. It doesn't do nuance.
Mm.
It doesn't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a disappointing performance review. When that 100 millisecond error signal hits, the amygdala immediately floods your nervous system with stress hormones,
Cortisol, adrenaline, all of that.
primarily cortisol and adrenaline.
Mm.
I want you to really think about the physical sensation of making a public mistake. You know that sudden prickling heat that rises in your chest and flushes your neck?
Oh, yeah.
The way your heart suddenly starts hammering against your ribs? The narrowing of your vision, where the room seems to tunnel in on you? That isn't you being emotionally fragile. That is a predictable, mechanical hardware response.
It's just the machine doing what the machine does.
Exactly. You are instantly shifted into fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Oh.
All the blood flow is being routed away from your rational prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that solves problems and thinks logically, and sent to your extremities to prepare you to run for your life. You are neurologically less intelligent in that exact moment than you were a second before, purely because the amygdala has essentially bypassed your rational operating system.
That is wild to me. So when I'm sitting there at my desk, quietly beating myself up for overreacting to a minor mistake, I'm actually fighting millions of years of evolutionary biology.
You are?
My brain is going into a negativity bias on absolute overdrive. It's actively scanning for threats and replaying that failure in a loop. But why? Like, why does the brain cling to the negative so fiercely?
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, the negativity bias makes perfect sense. It is a survival mechanism. Your brain's primary job is not to make you happy. Its primary job is to keep you alive.
Right.
It is trying to learn the threat so it never happens again.
Yeah.
Think about our ancient ancestors living on the savannah. If they ignored a success, they found a really delicious berry bush but forgot where it was the next day. They might go hungry for a day, but they would survive. The consequence of forgetting a positive event is relatively low.
That makes sense.
But if they ignored a threat, like the faint rustling of a predator in the tall grass, they were dead. Evolutionarily speaking, ignoring a success won't kill you, but ignoring a threat absolutely will.
So we are the descendants of the paranoid people.
Essentially, yes. The ancestors who survived to pass on their genes were the ones whose brains hyperfixated on the negative. So today, your brain hardwires negative events into your memory with a massive emotional charge to ensure you pay attention.
Wow.
That's why a week of incredible wins and positive feedback can be entirely eclipsed by one single tiny critique. Your brain is saying, the wins are nice, but this critique is a threat to our status in the tribe, and if we get kicked out of the tribe, we die.
Okay, honestly, that makes me feel so much better about dwelling on bad news. It's not a personal failing. It's my inner caveman trying to keep me from getting eaten.
Exactly.
But this is where I want to dive into the neural evidence because it gets incredibly granular and really shifts how we should think about mistakes. We looked at this fascinating study from the Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience Journal.
Oh, yes.
They took school-age children and used event-related potentials, which are essentially these highly sensitive EEG caps that track brainwaves, to measure exactly what happens in the brain the millisecond a child makes a mistake on a test.
This study is remarkable because it gives us a window into the precise, microscopic timeline of an error. The researchers measured two very distinct neural responses that happen in sequence. The first wave is called the ERN.
Error-related negativity.
Yes. This is that unconscious automatic alarm we just talked about. It peaks between 50 to 150 milliseconds post-response. It's the immediate oops signal generated in the anterior cingulate cortex.
Now, you just said anterior cingulate cortex. For those of us who aren't neuroscientists, what does that actually mean?
Think of the anterior cingulate cortex as your brain's internal check engine light.
Okay.
It constantly monitors your actions and compares them to your intended goals. The second your action deviates from the goal, like hitting the wrong key on a piano or saying the wrong word, that check engine light flashes instantly. That's the ERN. It's entirely unconscious. You don't control it.
Got it. So the ERN is the check engine light. But then there's the second wave that the study focused heavily on, which is the P, or error positivity wave.
Right.
And this one peaks a little later, between 200 and 500 milliseconds after the mistake. What is the brain doing during that half-second window?
This is where it gets critical. The P wave is associated with conscious error awareness, and most importantly, attention allocation. While the ERN is just the alarm bell, the P is your brain physically turning its spotlight of attention toward the error to figure out what went wrong.
It's investigating.
Exactly. And what's absolutely fascinating here is that the researchers found a direct, measurable correlation between a child's mindset and the physical size of this P wave.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
They looked at children who possessed a growth mindset, which is the belief that intelligence is not a fixed trait, but something highly malleable that can be improved with effort and learning. Those children actually showed a significantly larger P amplitude when they made a mistake compared to kids with a fixed mindset.
Meaning their brains were literally physically paying more attention to the mistake. They weren't just shrugging it off.
Yes, they unconsciously allocated far more cognitive resources to processing the error, and the behavioral data backed up the neurology. The study showed that this larger PET amplitude directly led to higher post-error accuracy.
Because they actually paid attention.
Right, because their brains paid deep, sustained attention to the mistake during that 200 to 500 millisecond window. They were much more likely to get the very next question right. They didn't flinch and look away to protect their ego. Their brains engaged with the failure as valuable data.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Because the researchers pointed out a completely counterintuitive fact about how we typically raise kids or even how we manage employees. When a child makes a mistake or when a junior employee messes up a project, an adult's first instinct, well, my first instinct is often to comfort them. We want to soften the blow. If a kid fails a math test, we say, "Oh, buddy, it's okay. Don't worry about that math problem. You're still so smart in reading." We try to distract them from the pain of the failure. Isn't that a good thing? Aren't we protecting their confidence?
It absolutely comes from a place of deep empathy and love. We want to protect their self-esteem from taking a hit. But the neurological evidence suggests that by doing this, we might be actively harming their ability to learn.
Harming it.
Yes. By distracting them from the mistake in that critical moment, we might be short-circuiting this crucial pay attention phase. We are inadvertently hindering their brain's biological process of engaging with the error, unpacking it, and bouncing back. We're telling their brain to look away just when it's trying to allocate the necessary attention to fix the problem.
So we're essentially saying, hey, don't look at the check engine light, look at the pretty radio. And as a result, the car breaks down.
Exactly.
We rob the brain of the exact data it needs to improve. That is a massive paradigm shift. Resilience isn't about ignoring the failure or quickly sweeping it under the rug with toxic positivity. It's about leaning into that 200 to 500 millisecond window and letting the brain process the data.
We have to let the process happen.
But here is where I get stuck. If our hardware is wired to freak out with the amygdala hijack, but we simultaneously need to let the brain deeply process the error to learn from it, how do we keep from falling off a cliff? Because when I process an error, I don't just objectively analyze it, I spiral. I catastrophize.
A very fine line to walk.
Which brings us directly into the psychological layer of this, moving from the hardware of the brain to the software of our thoughts. Let's look at the research we have on cognitive traps and the stories we tell ourselves. There is a deeply ingrained trap discussed in our sources known as all-or-nothing thinking.
Yes, all-or-nothing thinking, also known as black and white thinking or polarized thinking, is a major cognitive distortion. It's a mental filter where you view situations and yourself in absolute extreme terms. There is no middle ground, no nuance, and no spectrum of success.
When you're trapped in this all-or-nothing mindset, it's basically like looking through a completely broken camera lens. You only get two exposure settings, pitch black or blindingly overexposed.
Exactly.
You either think, I am a brilliant generational genius, or I am a complete and total failure who should never try again.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no gray area to work with. If you are on a diet and you eat one single cookie, your brain says, well, the entire diet is ruined. I'm a failure. I might as well eat the whole box.
It's an exhausting way to live.
It really is. If someone doesn't text you back immediately, the relationship is entirely doomed. But let me push back on this again. Doesn't all-or-nothing thinking drive elite performers? When you look at people like Kobe Bryant or Steve Jobs, they demanded absolute perfection. If I'm not a perfectionist, don't I just become complacent and mediocre?
That is a very common misconception, and it's vital to separate high standards from fragile perfectionism.
Okay, break that down for me.
High standards involve pursuing excellence, while recognizing that growth requires iterative failure. You can strive for a 100% success rate while accepting a 90% outcome as a stepping stone. All-or-nothing thinking, on the other hand, is entirely destructive because it doesn't allow for iteration.
It's just pass or fail.
Right. And again, we have to recognize that your brain isn't actively trying to sabotage you in this distortion. This is the brain's misguided attempt to simplify an overwhelmingly complex world.
It's a shortcut.
Exactly. When you are stressed, the brain wants to make rapid, low-energy decisions without weighing nuanced options. Categorizing things into perfect or garbage saves cognitive energy. It also uses this extreme thinking as a defense mechanism to protect your ego from future disappointment by preparing for the absolute worst, or it tries to motivate you through raw, adrenaline-fueled fear.
But the result is a constant toxic state of physiological and psychological stress. You are demanding your body operate at maximum tension at all times.
Yes, which is unsustainable.
And the data on how widespread and damaging this is, well, it's actually really sobering. Cognitive distortions like this aren't just quirky personality traits, they are public health issues. The research indicates that these severe cognitive distortions affect approximately 1 in 6 adults in the UK.
That's a massive portion of the population.
And there's a specific piece of research from the British Psychological Society that highlights the severe mental health impact of this. They found that over 70% of young people who died by suicide had exceedingly high expectations of themselves.
It's deeply tragic.
Unchecked perfectionism and this absolute all-or-nothing mentality have real, sometimes tragic consequences. It's a suffocating way to live.
It highlights the extreme danger of tying your fundamental human identity to flawless performance. When you believe that anything less than 100% perfection equates to total, unforgivable failure, you set yourself up for an endless cycle of self-criticism. Every minor setback becomes an indictment of your character.
Which naturally leads us to a foundational concept in psychology, the battle between learned helplessness and learned optimism. This was heavily researched by Dr. Martin Seligman, and it's beautifully outlined in the university materials we reviewed.
Yes, the materials break down how we explain events to ourselves using what they call the 3P: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization.
The 3Ps.
This is the core architectural difference between a pessimistic brain and an optimistic brain. And to be clear, we aren't talking about toxic positivity here. We're talking about how you functionally narrate your life.
Exactly. Let's walk through the exact examples provided in the research because they illustrate the point perfectly and show how these 3Ps operate in real time. Let's take a good event, like getting an A on a difficult college exam.
Okay, if you have a pessimistic explanatory style, you look at that A and you immediately externalize it. You strip yourself of the credit. You say, the teacher was just being lenient today. It was a lucky test. I just happened to guess the right answers. You don't internalize the success.
But the optimist internalizes it entirely. They say, I got an A because I studied hard, I am intelligent, and I did a good job.
Now, let's look at how those two brains process a bad event, like getting a failing grade on that same test. This is where the 3Ps really come into play.
Right.
The pessimist views this failure through the lens of the first P: permanence. They think, I am always going to fail this class, I am fundamentally bad at this subject, and I always will be. It is fixed and unchangeable.
It's permanent.
Yes. The optimist, however, views the failure as entirely temporary. They think, this is only one test. I had a bad day, or I used the wrong study method this specific time, but I'll do better on the next one.
And then there is the second P, which is pervasiveness. The example they give in the research is highly relatable. It's being turned down for a date.
A very common rejection.
Right. The pessimistic brain takes that one rejection and makes it universal and pervasive across their entire life. They say, nobody likes me. I am fundamentally unlovable. I will be alone forever. They let the failure bleed into every corner of their existence.
It pervades everything.
Exactly. But the optimistic brain keeps it highly specific and compartmentalized. They say, that one specific person doesn't want to go to the movies with me on Friday. That doesn't mean they're unlovable. It just means a specific request was denied by a specific person.
And the final P is personalization. When things go wrong, do you blame yourself entirely, or do you recognize external factors? The pessimist internalizes the blame completely, while the optimist looks at the broader context.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture of resilience, you can see how the pessimistic style viewing bad events as permanent, pervasive, and intensely personal creates a psychological prison.
It leads directly to what Seligman called learned helplessness. This is a state where you literally stop trying because your brain has concluded that your actions have no effect on your outcomes. You believe you are doomed regardless of effort.
Which is terrifying.
Optimism, in this clinical psychological context, is not about walking around with a fake smile or ignoring reality. It's a highly functional, tactical, cognitive strategy. It is the ability to quarantine failure so it doesn't infect your entire identity.
Quarantining failure. I love that phrasing, which is the perfect segue into our next major area of focus, the fragility of identity and self-esteem. We reviewed some incredible insights that ask a really tough, deeply uncomfortable question. Is your high self-esteem actually secure, or is it just a fragile ego desperately waiting to be shattered?
This is perhaps the most crucial distinction we can make today. A vast majority of people walk around believing they have high self-esteem because they feel great about themselves when they are succeeding. When the compliments are rolling in and the numbers are up, they feel powerful. But that is what psychologists call contingent self-worth.
Contingent meaning it depends entirely on the outside world.
Exactly. Secure self-esteem, on the other hand, is steady. It's an anchor. It's based on deep internalized beliefs about your inherent human value, and it remains remarkably stable regardless of external feedback. Fragile self-esteem is a roller coaster. It is entirely contingent on your daily performance and the continuous validation you receive from others. If the validation stops, the self-esteem plummets.
And the dangers of operating with fragile self-esteem are wild. It literally distorts how you perceive reality. The research shows that people with fragile self-esteem experience something called hostile attributional bias.
Yes, demonstrated in a fascinating 2019 study.
Right. It essentially means your brain perceives malicious personal attacks in completely neutral, everyday feedback. Let's actually play this out, because I think everyone has experienced this either firsthand or with a coworker.
Let's do it.
Let's say we work together and I'm your manager. I send you a completely standard, mundane email that says, hey, can we adjust the formatting on this spreadsheet before the client meeting this afternoon? If you have secure self-esteem, how does your brain process that sentence?
If I have secure self-esteem, my brain processes the text literally. I read the email and think, okay, the spreadsheet needs different formatting for the client. The formatting is the object of critique, not me. I will change the font and adjust the margins. Task received and understood. My heart rate doesn't change. My self-worth isn't implicated.
Right. But if you have fragile self-esteem and you are operating with hostile attributional bias, how does that exact same sentence land?
It lands like a physical blow. I read, can we adjust the formatting on this spreadsheet? But my brain translates it as, you are incompetent. You cannot even handle basic formatting. I regret hiring you. Everyone else in the office knows you're an imposter and you are entirely inadequate.
Over a spreadsheet.
Over a spreadsheet. Because my identity is entirely contingent on my performance, any critique of my work is automatically processed as a devastating critique of my soul. I will likely become immediately defensive, I might send a passive-aggressive reply, and I will ruminate on that email all night long.
That is exhausting just to hear. And the research shows this bleeds far beyond the office. It destroys social relationships, too. There's a study that found fragile self-esteem strongly correlates with increased paranoia in romantic relationships.
That makes total sense.
Because your worth is contingent, you constantly need your partner to reassure you. You ask, are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Constantly, which eventually strains the relationship and actually lowers happiness for both partners.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In the workplace, multiple studies show that this fragility leads to drastically higher risks of burnout and severe depression. You are constantly riding an emotional roller coaster dictated entirely by external events you can't control.
There is a specific 2021 study on this dynamic that illustrates why it creates such a toxic environment. It explores the difference between appraisal respect and recognition respect.
Oh, this was fascinating.
What's fascinating here is how different types of self-esteem demand different types of respect from the world. Individuals with secure self-esteem thrive on what's called recognition respect. This is an objective, detached evaluation of their work or their output. They can look at their output as an entity separate from themselves.
Yeah.
They want you to tell them if the bridge they built is structurally sound.
But people with fragile self-esteem seek appraisal respect. They literally need to be told constantly that they are a good person. They conflate their professional output with their fundamental right to exist, and this completely destroys the ability to give or receive workplace feedback.
It really does.
Think about it. You cannot tell an employee with fragile self-esteem, you are a wonderful, valuable human being, but frankly, this quarterly report is terrible and we need to redo it. They physically cannot hear the first part of that sentence. All they hear is that they are terrible and worthless.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really profound, counterintuitive finding from the University of Washington. Research by psychology professor Jonathan Brown completely challenged the long-held societal belief about who falls harder when they fail.
The old assumption was always, the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Right. The idea that arrogant people or people with very high self-esteem would suffer devastating psychological blows from failure because they aren't used to it.
But the exact reverse is true. It blew my mind. It is actually people with low self-esteem who suffer exponentially more and who wildly overgeneralize the failure.
Brown's study looked at how people rated their own intelligence after experiencing a failure. The findings were stark. After a single failure on a task, people with low self-esteem actually rated their own general intelligence and their overall competencies significantly lower than they did before the task.
They let one failure taint everything.
They allowed one isolated failure to drag down their entire global self-assessment. Meanwhile, people with high self-esteem did the exact opposite. They actually slightly inflated their intelligence ratings after a failure. They subconsciously boosted their self-perception to compensate for the failure and protect their ego.
The UW study had this amazing, highly relatable analogy to explain this, and I want to share it. Think about two 15-year-old high school kids who want to ask someone out on a date to a dance.
A classic high-stress scenario.
Right. So the kid with high self-esteem will gather his courage and ask the person out if he believes he has roughly 50 odds of getting a yes. He thinks, hey, maybe she says yes, maybe she says no. If she says no, it'll sting for a day, but I'm still a cool guy.
He assesses the risk objectively.
But the kid with low self-esteem is so deeply terrified of the failure because that rejection will fundamentally damage his already fragile identity that he needs a guaranteed 95% or 100% chance of success before he will even attempt to ask the question.
It perfectly illustrates how low self-esteem creates a lifelong paralysis of action. You avoid risk entirely because the psychological cost of failure is simply too high for your fragile ego to bear. You stay in the safe zone forever. This is why transitioning from a fragile, contingent self-esteem to a secure, stable self-worth is the absolute non-negotiable foundation of mental toughness.
Which brings us to a major paradigm shift. We've talked about the hardware, the software, and the ego. Now, I want to talk about how we redefine mental toughness, because frankly, I feel like modern corporate hustle culture has sold us a massive, damaging lie about what resilience actually looks like.
A very damaging lie.
We hear these slogans everywhere: push through the pain, grind it out, sleep when you're dead, endure the suffering. But I'm looking at this research, and it seems like that approach is a one-way ticket to a hospital bed.
That is the myth of endurance, and it is pervasive. Our research clarifies this distinction brilliantly. Endurance and resilience are not the same thing. In fact, relying solely on endurance will eventually destroy your resilience.
Say more about that.
Endurance is simply the raw capacity to withstand stress. It is gritting your teeth, clenching your jaw, and taking the punishment without complaining. But doing that, maintaining that constant state of high sympathetic arousal, drastically increases what we call your allostatic load.
Allostatic load. Okay, let's break that down. That's essentially the physical wear and tear on your body from chronic, unresolved stress, right? The cortisol just eroding your system.
Yes. Think of your nervous system like a thick piece of metal wire. Endurance is the act of repeatedly bending that metal wire back and forth over and over again to withstand a force. The metal might hold its shape for a while. You might look tough on the outside. But internally, with every bend, microscopic fractures are forming in the structure. And eventually, without warning, the metal just snaps. That is what a nervous breakdown or a severe burnout episode is. It's the catastrophic failure of endurance.
So resilience is different.
Resilience, conversely, is not about how much punishment you can take. Resilience is defined strictly by the efficiency of returning to your baseline. It is the elasticity of the material. It's how quickly you can bend under pressure and then snap cleanly back to your original shape, relaxed and ready, without sustaining any structural damage.
The elasticity is what matters, not the rigidity. To really understand what this looks like at the absolute highest level of human performance, we have this incredible source. It's a deep dive study into the lived experiences of elite, world-class women athletes. We're talking about downhill mountain bikers, half-pipe snowboarders, and trampolinists.
High-stakes environments.
The highest. These are individuals who literally risk catastrophic bodily injury or even their lives every single time they go to work. The stakes could not be higher.
The study utilizes a psychological framework called Lazarus's cognitive motivational relational theory of emotion.
Okay, that is a massive mouthful of academic jargon. What does Lazarus's theory actually mean in plain English? How does a snowboarder use it?
At its core, Lazarus's theory breaks down how we process stress into two stages: primary appraisal and secondary appraisal. Primary appraisal is the immediate question: is this event a threat to me? Secondary appraisal is the follow-up question: do I have the resources to handle this threat?
Okay, simple enough.
What the study shows is that these elite athletes appraise major stressors completely differently than the average person. During the primary appraisal of a massive stressor, say a terrifying fall during a qualifying run or a sudden change in weather conditions, they do not view it as a threat to their fundamental well-being or their identity.
Whereas a normal person would.
Right. While a novice might panic and think, I'm going to die, I'm a terrible athlete, the elite athlete appraises the stressor as an active opportunity for growth. They instantly flip the script. They view the adversity as a puzzle that, once solved, will build their physical and psychological resources for the finals.
And there was a specific interview in this study with a half-pipe snowboarder. They referred to her under the pseudonym Morgan. That gave us one of the absolute best metaphors I've ever heard for emotional regulation. She called it the zipper effect.
It is brilliant.
I am completely obsessed with this concept. I want everyone listening to steal this immediately.
It's a brilliant, tactile visualization of how world-class performers integrate two concepts that society usually tells us are complete opposites: intense mental toughness and profound self-compassion.
Right. Because usually we think those two things cannot coexist. We think if I am mentally tough, if I am a warrior, I cannot have self-compassion. Self-compassion is for soft people. If I'm kind to myself, I'll lose my edge.
That is the complacency myth. The deep-seated fear is that if you forgive yourself for a mistake, if you let yourself off the hook, you will immediately accept mediocrity and stop striving for greatness. But Morgan's zipper effect entirely dispels this myth. She describes interweaving mental toughness and self-compassion like the interlocking teeth of a zipper. They alternate rapidly.
Okay, paint that picture for us.
Think about the timeline of her performance. During the run, when she is standing at the top of the frozen half-pipe, dropping in to do a series of lethal flips, she is purely 100% mentally tough. She stays intensely focused, she aggressively suppresses her fear, and she ignores all emotion to execute the physical task. There is no room for self-compassion while you are upside down in the air.
But at the very second the run is over, the moment her board hits the flat ground at the bottom, especially if she falls or gets a concussion, which she talked about openly in the interview, the next tooth of the zipper interlocks.
Precisely.
She immediately, consciously switches from mental toughness to intense self-compassion. She doesn't berate herself. She takes care of her physical body. She actively downregulates her emotions. She forgives the mistake instantly. She says, ouch, that hurt. Let's get you some ice and some rest. And then, an hour later, when it's time to hike back up the mountain for the next run, she zips back into mental toughness.
This specific dynamic raised a critical question for the researchers. Does applying that self-compassion at the bottom of the half-pipe blunt the athlete's competitive edge? Does it make them weaker?
And the answer?
The physiological and behavioral findings emphatically say no. It makes them stronger. In reality, self-compassion is the ultimate tool to prevent rumination. It prevents that initial 100-millisecond amygdala hijack from turning into a 3-day exhausting spiral of self-loathing.
Because it clears the system.
Exactly. By extending profound kindness to yourself immediately after the event, you clear the toxic emotional baggage out of your nervous system. And once the emotion is cleared, you can look at the failure objectively. You can engage in highly constructive clinical self-criticism without feeling like you're attacking your own identity. You can say, my weight was too far forward on the landing, instead of saying, I am a pathetic failure.
That is so powerful. You use the mental toughness to execute the task, and you use the self-compassion to recover from the task, and you just zip them together back and forth all day long.
It's a beautiful system.
Okay, so we know the hardware is rigged to freak us out. We know our self-esteem might be secretly fragile. We know we need to quarantine our failures and use the zipper effect. But I'm feeling a little overwhelmed here. If I'm actively having an amygdala hijack right now, if my heart is pounding because I just sent an email to the wrong client, what do I actually do? I can't just philosophize my way out of a panic attack.
You are exactly right. When the amygdala hijack is active, philosophy fails. Which brings us to the actionable neuroprotocol. We have distilled this research into a specific 5-tool framework. This is the ultimate toolkit for you to use the very next time you face a setback.
Let's dive into Tool 1. Tool 1 is the physiological sigh. This is a 30-second reset researched heavily by neurobiology labs, particularly out of Stanford. The core premise here is that when you are in the middle of that severe amygdala hijack, you literally cannot think your way out of it.
Your prefrontal cortex is offline.
Right. Telling yourself to calm down is useless. You have to use a mechanical lever to force your biology to change.
The physiological sigh is precisely that mechanical lever. It exploits the architecture of your respiratory and circulatory systems to force a state change. The pattern is very simple, but the mechanics behind it are profound. The pattern is 2 sharp, deep inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long, extended sighing exhale through the mouth.
Let's break down why this works mechanically.
Inside your lungs, you have millions of tiny balloon-like air sacs called alveoli. When you are highly stressed, breathing shallowly, or staring intently at a screen, these alveoli actually collapse on themselves. They deflate.
Okay, so deflated.
That first deep inhale through the nose brings in oxygen, but it's that second sharp top-up inhale that is the magic. That second sharp intake of air forcefully pops those collapsed alveoli back open, reinflating them. This instantly maximizes the surface area of your lungs.
And then comes the exhale. You do a long, slow sigh out through the mouth, which dumps a massive amount of carbon dioxide out of your system all at once.
Exactly. And dumping that CO2 sends an immediate, highly direct mechanical signal via the vagus nerve to the brainstem. It orders the heart rate to slow down. This is not meditation. This is not a mindfulness exercise. This is a forced biological override code for your nervous system. Doing this 1 to 3 times kills the amygdala hijack in real time, drastically lowering your heart rate and pulling blood flow back to your rational prefrontal cortex.
That is incredible. So step 1, you physically stop the panic. You do the sigh. Now you have your brain back online. That leads directly to tool 2, which is catching the psychological spiral before it starts. Name it to tame it and decatastrophizing. Once your heart rate is down, you have to manage the thoughts. We're looking at a protocol developed by Dr. Dan Siegel.
Name it to tame it is the simple but profound act of consciously labeling your emotion as it arises. Instead of being entirely consumed by anger or fear, you take a mental step back and state to yourself, defensiveness is rising in me right now, or I'm experiencing panic.
You detach from it.
Yes. By turning the emotion into an object that you are observing, rather than an identity you are inhabiting, you physically move the brain's electrical activity away from the emotional centers of the amygdala and force it back into the logical language processing centers of the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
You're re-engaging your rational brain.
And from there, once you've named it, you use a classic 4-step cognitive behavioral therapy framework to decatastrophize the situation. Let's walk through this using a really common, highly stressful example. Let's say you just hit reply all on a sensitive email and sent it to the wrong client. Panic City.
Step 1.
Step 1, identify the catastrophic thought. Your brain is screaming, I completely ruined the account, the client is going to sue us, and I am definitely getting fired today.
Step 2.
Step 2, you have to challenge the evidence like a hostile witness in a courtroom. You ask yourself, is there hard empirical proof that I will be fired today? Well, no, it was an administrative error. I worked here for 3 years and have a good track record. Step 3, examine the alternatives. What is the realistic middle ground? The realistic middle ground is that my boss will be annoyed, I will have to apologize to the client, and it will be an awkward afternoon, but no one is dying.
And finally, step 4.
Step 4, replace it with a functional thought. You tell yourself, I made an embarrassing mistake. I need to draft a clarifying apology email immediately, but my overall job is safe. You don't pretend it didn't happen, but you actively manage the mental weather so you can take action.
Which perfectly sets up tool 3, closing the Zeigarnik loop. This tool specifically addresses the widespread phenomenon of productivity, guilt, and anxiety that ruins our ability to recover, especially over the weekend.
Oh my goodness, yes. Let me tell a quick story about this. I did exactly this last month. I made a really dumb typo in a presentation on a Friday at 4 p.m. I noticed it right as I logged off. And I spent my entire Saturday at my 6-year-old niece's birthday party, mentally rewriting the apology email I was going to send on Monday. I was physically present at the party handing out cake, but neurologically I was sitting in my cubicle sweating bullets. My weekend was totally ruined.
You fell victim to the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is a well-documented psychological principle stating that the human brain remembers uncompleted or interrupted tasks significantly better than completed ones. A failure or an unresolved mistake is the ultimate open loop for your brain. Because it senses danger, your subconscious keeps pulling the file up, demanding closure. It keeps pinging you with anxiety, which completely prevents your nervous system from entering a parasympathetic rest and digest state. You cannot recover while the loop is open.
So what is the fix? Because I can't always fix a mistake on a Friday night.
The fix is implementing a strict, physical, pre-recovery shutdown ritual. Before you log off for the weekend or before you leave your desk for the evening, you take a piece of paper and you physically write down 3 distinct things. First, clearly state the mistake that happened. Second, Write down the objective lesson you learned from it. Third, and most importantly, write down the exact, specific first step you will take on Monday morning to fix it.
Just writing it down changes things.
It does. By writing down that actionable next step, you signal to your subconscious that the loop is acknowledged, planned for, and handled. You give your brain neurological permission to actually close the file and rest.
Brilliant. Tool 4 focuses on expanding your capacity for stress before it even happens. This is about building armor. We're looking at microadversities and NSDR. I've heard people talk about building mental armor, but how do you actually do it?
It requires controlled exposure.
Right. The research points to engaging in controlled spikes of your sympathetic nervous system. The absolute classic example of this is taking 30 to 60 seconds of shockingly cold water at the very end of your daily shower. But the key here, and I think people miss this all the time, isn't just gritting your teeth and suffering through the cold. If you just endure it, you're just building allostatic load.
That's the endurance myth again.
Exactly. The actual magic is maintaining that calm, physiological sigh breathing pattern while you are standing in the freezing water. You are purposefully putting yourself in a high-stress, panic-inducing environment and then using your mechanical breathing to forcefully remain calm. You are neurologically teaching your brain, hey, we can be in a highly uncomfortable, stressful situation and we can still remain entirely in control.
That is profound exposure therapy for stress. And you pair those microadversities with NSDR, or non-sleep deep rest. This is a protocol heavily popularized by neurobiologist Dr. Andrew Huberman. NSDR involves taking 10 to 20 minutes a day to listen to a guided relaxation script, similar to a yoga nidra practice. But the goal isn't to fall asleep. The goal is to intentionally force your autonomic nervous system into a state of deep, profound parasympathetic relaxation while remaining fully awake.
To lower your baseline.
Yes. By practicing this daily, you are fundamentally lowering your baseline resting heart rate. You're building resilience capacity. Think of it this way. If your resting heart rate is normally at an anxious 85 beats per minute, a sudden mistake will spike you to 120, putting you in a full panic attack. But if you use NSDR to lower your baseline to a calm 60 beats per minute, that exact same mistake only spikes you to 95. You are still completely in the rational zone. You're expanding the size of the container that holds your stress.
Expanding the container. I love that. And finally, tool 5, building self-efficacy. This is where we bring everything home, relying on Albert Bandura's legendary 1977 theory on self-efficacy. This is the cornerstone of genuine confidence.
Bandura's work is essential because he made a critical, life-changing distinction between two types of expectations: outcome expectations and efficacy expectations.
Okay, outcome expectations.
An outcome expectation is simply the logical knowledge that a certain behavior will produce a certain result. For example, knowing that studying hard for 3 weeks will lead to a good grade on the bar exam, or knowing that eating vegetables will make you healthier. We all have outcome expectations.
But efficacy expectation is entirely different. Efficacy expectation is the deep-seated belief that you personally have the capability to successfully execute that required behavior. You might know that studying works perfectly well for other people, but if you don't believe you personally have the focus or the intelligence to study for 3 weeks, you won't even attempt it.
Exactly. Without efficacy expectation, knowledge is useless. And what Bandura found, through rigorous study, is that the single most powerful way to build self-efficacy is not through pep talks. It is through what he called performance accomplishments.
Performance accomplishments.
Yes. You do not build unshakable confidence by standing in front of your bathroom mirror and reciting positive affirmations. You build it through undeniable, empirical proof of your own capability. By utilizing the tools we've discussed today, the physiological side to control your biology, the CBT reframing to control your thoughts, the zipper effect to balance toughness and compassion, you survive failures. You navigate setbacks without breaking. You recover quickly, and you achieve small, incremental wins.
It's building evidence.
Every single time you process a failure and step back up to the plate, you lay down another brick of empirical evidence in your brain that you are capable.
You build an undeniable historical track record for yourself that your brain cannot argue with. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Let's recap this massive journey we've been on today. We have learned that the crushing weight of a failure is, at its core, a 100 millisecond biological hijack. It is an evolutionary alarm system designed to keep you alive on the savannah. It is absolutely not a moral failing or a sign of weakness.
Not at all.
By recognizing the insidious cognitive traps like all-or-nothing thinking and the pessimistic 3 Ps, we can actively stop the spiral of learned helplessness. We can consciously choose to shift from a fragile identity where our fundamental human worth is desperately tied to our daily output to a secure, grounded self-esteem that values objective recognition and process over perfection.
We can choose to be secure.
We can actively practice Morgan's zipper effect, weaving moments of intense mental toughness with immediate, profound self-compassion to prevent the structural damage of burnout. And we can use incredibly practical physical protocols like the physiological sigh and NSDR to literally mechanically dump stress out of our bodies in real time.
You have the tools.
You need to remember this one thing above all else. Unshakable confidence isn't about never failing. That is a biological impossibility. True deep confidence is walking into a high-stakes presentation or a difficult conversation, knowing that if you fall completely flat on your face, your nervous system has the exact biological and psychological tools required to recover within 24 hours. You have always had the hardware, and now you finally have the operating manual.
We have talked extensively today about how to bounce back from a mistake, how to survive it, and how to clear it from your system. But I want you to consider one final provocative thought based on the microscopic neural evidence we explored regarding those school-age children.
The P wave.
Yes. Since we know that the brain physically allocates significantly more attention, that larger P amplitude, during the exact half-second after you make an error, what if we have been looking at mistakes completely backward our entire lives? What if your mistakes are not setbacks at all, but rather the exact specific moments your brain is unlocking its greatest biological capacity to absorb new information? What if, instead of being a traumatic event you simply need to recover from, failure is actually the strict biological prerequisite for your next level of intelligence?